Hey folks, and welcome to another episode of Crit Hit Reviews with your host, Arlyeon. On today's episode, I'll be talking about Portal Entertainment's Rogue Empire, which they courteously sent me a review code for. Find out with me if this dungeon-crawling roguelike is a crowning achievement, or if in this case, the Empire strikes out. Yeah, I went there. There's this pair of stories to follow here, really, though I'm pretty sure they may be interconnected. The word prologue, alongside its ending, was my tip-off. See, the prologue follows a human warrior who's busy wading through a dungeon of fate for, reasons. Involving, like, a MacGuffin of fate that he wants to acquire for more reasons that I'm really hazy on. The main story, I can only gather, comes after the realization of everything that happens during the somewhat lengthy tutorial adventure, and proceeds to cover the wanderings of an individual whose species and class remain shrouded in mystery. Read is player selected, and who's drawn into an epic quest to fend off the world's gradual descent into shadows. For, reasons. The reoccurring thing here, I had no idea really why it's going down, but it's going down. Anyways, honestly, the story isn't exactly the most involved thing, given that some 26 hours later, the biggest bits of lore I can parse together is bad things are happening for, reasons that I'm not entirely sure about, but have a guess about. But yeah, basically, there's a sparse few NPCs that you can talk to, and dialogue with them tends to be simple, with the largest dumps of info coming in the form of literal, just narrative exposition dump screens that pop up when you reach certain points in the story, and proceed to scroll narrative at you. A big shrug there. That said, while I am curious about the story and where it's going, it's honestly the gameplay that had me wandering through the game as much as I have. Partly because it's pretty tricky at times. For veterans of roguelikes, you're gonna see a number of mainstays, like randomized floor generation, permadeath, and even the more classical elements like turn-based movements. It also has some degrees of survival mechanics in play, so you'll need to avoid, like, starving to death and allowing your overall state of health to deteriorate, since that tends to suck a fair bit. Inversely, getting extremely healthy also makes the game a bit more manageable. I recommend that. Don't starve. I think the part I wasn't quite expecting was the level up system, since it offers you a semi-random set of options. Like, you do get a certain number of stat points, but you also then get a choice of whether you want stat points, maybe some gold, occasionally supplies, which are of varying degrees of rarity, which are also randomly generated. There's also skill points you acquire every even level. Unless you're human, then you get 1 point on any level ending in 5. Like, on top of the skill points you already get. But anyways, these are also random, both in what appear as well as their overall rarity. Though it should be noted that they are at least rather pertinent to the class you choose, same as the stat points. It can make planning a strategy long-term a little bit difficult all the same, especially if you get things that would complement a certain fighting style and then never actually find anything really useful for that. That said, I did find the tutorial straightforward enough. Sure, I died a few times, but I mean, if you're really having trouble, there is a difficulty setting, and the easy setting makes things a lot more accessible. But even without those, the game does have certain elements which can drastically improve your odds of success, and which may make the game qualify more as a roguelite. See, whether you're playing the tutorial or the main game, as you level and beat up critters, your score increases, which can then be used to flex off against random strangers on the internet, as well as to acquire passive stat bonuses or leveling upgrades, like reduced hunger or more valuable drops, which really help with the main game because it's a whole different beast from the tutorial. Now, I should specify it's not exactly your score that does it, rather it is as you get high scores, this translates into soul essence, which you can spend on those upgrades. Unless you turn the game on story mode, which prevents permanent death, but also prevents you from gaining score, so the game sort of just stays as difficult as it is. And I'm not just saying that the main game is a different beast from the tutorial because it's a lot longer, or because of the fact that you suddenly have the option of playing as a different species, like being a walking tree, a troll, or a cat person, or that you even have class options other than I hit it with my sword. See, where the prologue only has you navigating a singular dungeon which you begin in, the main campaign has you navigating a world, which is sprinkled with both areas you need to visit, as well as side dungeons. But see, here's the thing. While the main dungeons seem to be fairly fixed in their relative difficulty and even have some neat set pieces within them, the overall difficulty of the side areas is a lot more difficult to predict. Like, I walked into one adjacent to the main quest area near the start of the game and got my health totaled in one shot by a lich who was just hanging out there. And I survived this with, like, almost no health, but hey, proceeded to come back some 12 levels later, and then still only managed to barely squeak out a win against that singular enemy, and then I saw reinforcements coming and was like, fuck that noise, I'm out. That said, the most daunting aspect about the side dungeons, I mean, other than my inability to remember which of them I've cleared, or the inability to make notes on the map, which would also really help in dungeons, is what can happen when you exit one of the side dungeons. See, more often than not, the exit to one of the optional areas is a portal, which can end up spitting you out a sizable distance from where you entered on the world map, in fact, ditching you in the middle of hostile and high-level territory, which is pretty daunting and also pretty lethal. And also super frustrating, because the world map actually does give the feeling of being on an adventure, and having the freedom to wander around and do your own thing, it's pretty neat, but it also just murders you dead if you're careless, especially since it drains a lot of your hunger meter. And I mean, yeah, there's some genuinely neat rewards in the dungeon crawls, whether it be generic rewards of looter experiences, or bonus stats that the game can dole out for you clearing floors that have challenging modifiers on them, like the inability to heal, to regenerate magic, or just constantly rapidly spawning enemies. So, there's some definite benefits to dabbling in the side areas, if you don't just roll over dead. That said, wandering around aimlessly might be an activity better left when you begin finding the game's epic items. And see, Rogue Empire does have the whole loot quality levels like other dungeon crawlers, albeit way less colors of the rainbow to worry about, but the one which really sticks out as notable is the legendaries, since they scale with your character's level and therefore always stay relevant. And there are shrines scattered in the game, which you can acquire components for, allowing you a selection of 3 items that are related to the shrine type, meaning that you can guarantee that if you find the right shrine for your build, the item will generally be useful to you, even if you can't exactly guarantee what the item is. So I mean, I guess it's in theory possible that you could get a whole bunch of weapons spawning that you don't need because you already have your main weapon, and I might not be providing this as a theoretical experience, but as a this totally happened to me thing. Anyways, honestly, it's nice to have weapons or armor you don't need to worry about changing up constantly, since the game, as I mentioned, is pretty lengthy. Like, you'll end up exploring a lot of dungeons, both necessary and otherwise, and traveling around on the world map. So, you should also probably be forewarned that you have a time limit of sorts to boot, because, the world is plunging into shadows. To be fair, I'm not entirely clear on what happens if it entirely falls under shadow, whether that will result in an automatic fail state, or just more of the ominous shadowy patches on the world that deal damage when you pass through them, because they do seem to grow more plentiful as you continue onwards. But it's definitely anxiety-inducing, and I didn't actually find any way to, properly lower it down, and that was several dungeons in. Whatever. I'm not going to complain too much. Anyways, yes, though the game's lengthy, permadeath still does preside as the rule of the land in the game's default setting. So, be mindful that should you die, you'll be starting all over again, albeit with more soul essence, so, you can acquire more of those passives to make your runs easier, Unless you don't want passives, because you can totally leave them off and just have the game be horribly difficult. But I mean, if you do want an experience that's more short and sweet and less murder hobo-y, you can totally turn on story mode. And if you just also want to dink around without having to worry about the constant ever-present threat of the world diving into darkness and you being doomed no matter what you do, there's also the endless dungeon mode that, simply plunks you into a randomly generated dungeon that continues to scale up in difficulty as you descend, so it'll probably kill you one day as well. It's just, it's chill. There's no story hinging on your every action with a time limit, so at least when you die, it doesn't feel as dreadful. Anyways, in the music department, honestly I dig it for this game, as a fair bit of it provides some solid ambience to the whole roaming across the countryside, getting into valiant adventures, getting your stuff mugged by a bunch of random rogues. That happened. There's a decent bit of variety in the tracks, with some being low-key. Like, I'm pretty sure some of this counts as, like, high fantasy tavern music, while other tunes are far more at home with the whole on an epic adventure to save the world, or something. In the visual department, the game is perhaps, insert air quotes, less traditional, end air quotes, than some of its ilk, given that you're not looking at a world built out of Ascii symbols. I mean, personally, I take this as a major plus, because the abstract nature of some of the old school, roguelikes completely melts my brain sometimes. But I know some people are really into it, so I figured I'd mention it. Anyways, when it comes to Rogue Empire, it's not that bad to look at, and honestly, I genuinely found it really neat that all the races and classes had their own little variants of the main character, so that was cool. And really, everything you need to know is pretty easy to, parse out and see, so I'm happy as a clam here. So anyways, now that we're at the final thoughts moment, I may as well mention that whilst I played a lot of game with roguelike elements, I haven't actually dabbled into that many which I played that follow the more traditional turn-based vein. And it was certainly an interesting experience. I mean, whilst I never really ended up with much of an investment in the game's narrative due to a combination of the limited storytelling and the many, many deaths which saw me starting from scratch because I did not play the game on story mode, I can say that it was an interesting experience. I genuinely did enjoy plunking around through the main dungeons, as well as occasionally taking my chance on the side content. Of note was a foray into the capital of an insectoid race, which led to me crowning myself their megalomaniacal overlord vis-a-vis right of combat, and also basically genociding half the population of their capital. And yet, all too often, I did find myself hitting a dead end, either by virtue, well, virtue seems like the wrong word, but an unfortunate enemy mechanic I hadn't encountered yet cleaning my clock, or tragic beginnings where I walk into a side dungeon and proceed to be completely obliterated in one shot. Rogue Empire is an interesting game, and I can certainly appreciate the modifiers that are in play that help progress. But I definitely say this title's base difficulty, at least for the main campaign, can be a bit harsh, since it can lead to a few days worth of gameplay disintegrating in an instant. Disheartening, yeah, and the balance certainly can feel wonky, what with high-level enemies obliterating you at the start of the game, or being teleported to the far-flung reaches of the map while low on supplies and gear. Personally, at the current juncture, I'd rate the game as a fumble. Certainly, I can see it appealing to people seeking out a lengthy roguelite/roguelite experience to dabble into, but I'd be more hard-pressed to recommend it to people who weren't fans of the genre to begin with. Anywho, we're now at the end of the video, so thanks for tuning in, folks. Whether you agree or disagree with my thoughts, I'd love to hear from you folks in the comments. And for those interested in more indie reviews or interviews with the developers, feel free to hit the subscribe button and the bell icon to get notified when we have a new release. You can join our Discord, click the link in the banner in the description, so you can become a part of our community. It's pretty cozy there. Lastly, if you'd like to help support the channel, we do have a coffee running now to help supplement funds for our lovely editors, and to make sure we continue to provide quality content. Again, check the description plus the banner for dem links. Anywho, I'll catch you in the next episode of Crit Hit. Take care till then, folks.